Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we will dive into a very exciting topic, measuring learning in the flow of work, master blended learning evaluation. This session is eligible for HRCI, SHRM, and ATD professional development credits. For those of you who aren't familiar with Brennan Hall Group, we are a leading research and analyst firm with a global reach of over 10,000 clients and over 30 years of experience. We provide research-based solutions that drive organizational excellence through innovative tools and insights. Our vision is to inspire a better workplace experience, and our mission is to empower organizations around the world through our research and tools each and every day. We also invite you, as always, to participate in our research surveys. Links will be available in your handout, or you can always visit brennanhall.com. Once the results are analyzed, all participants receive a piece of complimentary research and other exclusive benefits. If you want to learn more about our Excellence Awards, please visit excellenceawards.brennanhall.com. Brennan Hall Group Institute is the top research and insights institute serving learning, talent, and HR leaders worldwide. For over 3 decades, we've shaped the future of human capital management by providing essential research, certification, and recognition to organizations committed to excellence. Here is a sample of our clients. Our impact extends to over 10 million employees and executives through our comprehensive research library, strategic insights, and prestigious awards program. Now I want to give a big thank you to today's webinar sponsor, Explorance. Explorance empowers organizations with next-generation feedback and analytics to accelerate the insight to action cycle, encouraging the philosophy on feedback for the brave to drive purpose, impact, and growth. Now let's meet today's speakers. First is Michael Cohen, GM of Metrics That Matter at Explorance. We have Steve Lange, Director of Metrics That Matter at Explorance. And we have Roberta Gogos, Principal Analyst and VP at Brennan Hall Group. We are excited to share that at the end of today's webinar, we will be selecting a raffle winner. You could be the winner of a free Excellence in Action program submission. Stay tuned to see if you're the lucky winner. You must be present to win. And finally, now just a few quick things to note. If you have any questions, please use the questions panel on your control bar. We will answer questions throughout this webinar, and we're also recording it, and you'll get a link to a PDF of the slides within 24 hours. The chat box is open, so feel free to share your thoughts as we go along. Your input makes this more valuable for everyone. Now I'd like to pass things off to Michael.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ivy, and thank you, Roberta, for partnering with us and inviting us to present today. In our discussion on effective measurement in the flow of learning, we're going to be using blended learning as the use case, as the paradigm to discuss the stream of different interconnected learning interventions to really talk about how learning happens in the flow of work. So first, we're going to level set the discussion with a common definition that we can all agree on what blended learning is. We'll talk about the rise in blended learning, the use of blended learning, and effective measurement that you can impart on blended learning so that you can really make an impact to L&D organizations. So let's jump in. Blended learning. What is it? Well, simply defined, it's the combination of formal and informal learning events. Generally, there's an integration of virtual and face-to-face learning environments, and it's aligned, or it should be aligned, to a set of business and training goals. In our experience of working with hundreds of organizations in the corporate space, we find that these are some of the activities and interventions that organizations are deploying when they're doing blended learning. And I'd like to invite the folks that are on this webinar to put into the chat some of the most effective blended learning activities that you all are doing, perhaps things that you don't see on this slide or other novel things that you're doing to really amplify some of what we're mentioning. And we'll summarize some of those to the group in a few minutes. But let's talk a little bit more about blended learning deployment. When we see blended learning happening within the L&D workplace, we're finding that it's frequently being offered for programs such as onboarding, leadership, high potential, sales enablement. As mentioned earlier, blended learning typically takes advantage of multiple learning modalities and is deployed over the course of time, which can either be over days, weeks, months, or even over the course of a year. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the research, and to present some of that research, I'm going to call upon Roberta to share what some of the Brandon Hall Group is collecting, and that will set the broader context for this discussion throughout the rest of the webinar.
Thanks, Michael. So our latest research reveals a critical challenge. Like you can see the numbers on the screen. So let's have a look at that first one. So while it sounds good on the surface, it means that we're still leaving 20% of potential value on the table. For the second one there, what is concerning is that over a quarter of learning isn't being applied on the job, what we call scrap learning. But think about that, right? For every dollar you spend on training, more than 25 cents is essentially wasted because it never translates into actual workplace performance. And then lastly, despite these challenges, only about half of learning teams are effectively using analytics tools to measure and optimize their programs. So what this highlights is that there is this fundamental disconnect between learning investment and business impact. We're seeing a maturity gap in how learning functions position themselves within organizations. Many L&D teams still operate as service providers rather than strategic business partners, while the most successful ones are those that have learned to speak the language of business impact and can draw clear lines between the learning activities and organizational outcomes. But in today's climate, of course, this capability isn't just nice to have, it's essential for securing continued investment in people development. So today, as Michael introduced, we'll explore how when blended learning is properly measured and optimized, it can address these challenges and drive better business outcomes. And with that, before we dive deeper, we'd like to understand where everyone is in their blended learning journey. So let's pop over to this first poll. Are you currently using blended learning approaches in your organization? This might give us a baseline to understand who's already implementing these strategies and who might be considering them.
And while we're waiting, we've seen people pop off on the chat. A lot of simulations, business simulations, real life case studies. I'm seeing folks talking about even group discussions after workshops. So I think that's a big piece of where folks have been missing out in the previous years, where they're doing a lot of stuff, in the actual event, like what we're doing right now, but getting those group discussions going and the collaboration in between the more formalized events is where we see a lot of pickup happening, a lot more effectiveness, and really driving the value of these blended learning programs.
So let's look at the results. 88% are using blended learning today. All right, let's have a look at, for those who are using blended learning, I'm really curious about how extensively you've integrated it into your overall training strategy. And we've heard from people what they're doing. Let's take a look at that in a percentage. What percent of your current training mix is blended? Our research indicates that most forward-thinking organizations are shifting to hybrid learning. Our numbers show that 48% of organizations are using this approach, which is an increase over previous years. Let's see. What that looks like. All right. It's about 26 to 50% of programs at 42% and 51 to 75%. Okay.
It's a good
Michael,
decent amount. I mean, even across those three answers, that's a pretty big percentage that they're using it.
Exactly. Alrighty. So that's given us some insight into where organizations are in their blended learning journey. Now I'll hand it back over to Michael to discuss how learning delivery has evolved in recent years.
All right, well, thank you. And I think that this is a very progressive group for sure. There's no doubt that over the last couple of years, blended learning has rapidly increased. The data certainly reflects this. And you all are ahead of the data that is reflected from this data point, which shows that 40% of L&D folks are using blended learning for a significant part of their learning today, and 75% expected to increase. The stats from this group even exceed this data point. So certainly blended learning continues to rapidly increase. And you can see that, of course, across different news webinars such as this, but articles, blog posts. For those of you that are attending this session, you'll get a copy of these slides, and all of these story blocks have links that you can jump into and read more of these specific stories, which I think you'll find interesting. So Roberta, let's discuss some of the data regarding the transformation in terms of why this transformation has indeed happened and occurred. Roberta, you're on mute right now.
Yeah, of course. Sure thing. So our research shows this isn't a trend, it's a real paradigm shift. Organizations are making significant investments in transforming how they deliver. You can see the stats here on the screen. The 78% increase in e-learning and virtual training, reflecting both the pandemic's lasting impact and the recognized benefits of digital learning, digital delivery methods. 62% increase in self-paced micro-learning, which aligns with growing research about attention spans and the effectiveness of spaced learning. And then over half are focusing on cross-functional collaboration, which is a significant shift from a sort of siloed departmental training to more holistic approaches that reflect how work actually gets done. And lastly, that 51% have increased their emphasis on experiential training, moving beyond theoretical content to hands-on application, which directly addresses the scrap learning challenge I referred to earlier. Why this is particularly significant is what's significant about these stats is how they reflect changing workforce expectations. And research shows that learning approaches are now relatively balanced at 38% formal, 29% informal, 33% experiential. This balanced approach acknowledges that different skills require different learning modalities and that employee preferences vary. Experiential learning, a lot of the people in the audience have been experimenting with that from what I can see from chat. In particular, that's been incrementally increasing each year as organizations focus on demonstrating that employees can apply new skills in practical contexts. So this sort of represents the what of this transformation. Now I'll hand it back to Michael to explore the why behind this shift.
Okay, great. And to sort of sum this up very quickly, obviously the pandemic created an urgency for L&D to think outside the box, to deploy learning when face-to-face classroom was just simply not possible. But then another major factor has, of course, been technology innovations that's improved the availability and the cost effectiveness of being able to do blended learning. And then learners have obviously voted because they've told us that they like the flexibility, they prefer the flexibility of blended learning, they find it to be most effective. all of that's created opportunities, more opportunities to create feedback mechanisms. And with those opportunities, of course, comes some level of challenges. So I'm going to ask Roberta and Steve to talk a little bit more about those opportunities and challenges. Unmute again, Roberta.
Yeah, thank you. The research reveals both challenges and opportunities in the learning transformation journey, is what we've seen. There are many learning leaders feel caught between competing priorities and stakeholder demands. That 80% figure is particularly telling. And it actually was the single highest percentage for any challenge in the study. Too many learning leaders consider themselves victims to the business instead of part of the business, or not part of the business. The most successful teams are those that have clearly defined their role as business partners rather than service providers. The research suggests that implementing dedicated, like, for example, rapid response teams for urgent needs while maintaining focus on strategic initiatives can help resolve this tension. But measurement really becomes that bridge between the two worlds, providing data to justify long-term investments while showing immediate wins. And that's exactly where effective measurement in blended learning can help by, and I think that's a good segue for Steve to jump in.
Great, thank you. So we're going to have a poll question on this in a second, but we just wanted to provide some common evaluation challenges and opportunities we see when we're trying to really determine the impact and value of these blended learning solutions. Because let's face it, we're doing more and more of the way content gets delivered. I was just chatting with Chris about cross functional collaboration. Well, when you're collaborating with other functions in the business to both develop, design, and now deliver content, that can also be an evaluation challenge, right? Because now you're not just, it's not just L&D's content and delivery styles and systems. Now you're bringing in these other partners. But being able to do all of this and deliver it is one thing, and then the hard part then is, well, then how do we tell a story about this program overall? It's pretty easy to see how a webcast does or how an e-learning piece does, but then when we try to pull it together and tell a story, because that's what you're trying to do, right? The blended learning solution, it's not just about one thing. It's you're creating a program to drive something like leadership development or onboarding or digital marketing or something of that sort. So it's really, we want to be able to tell the story around how your program is driving success and organizational goals and initiatives. So let's go to the poll question then, if we can, and see what you guys have to say about this one.
Yeah.
So we're asking, what are challenges that you're facing with managing and measuring blended learning? And you can select as many as you'd like to on this one, because we know there's generally more than one.
And our research identifies several critical capability gaps that prevent organizations from fully realizing the benefits. Be interesting to see how the audience answers here. We found that about 49% of organizations cite budget constraints as a major challenge.
Yeah, I know with our clients, the challenge is looking at that number 3 there on the box. I'll be interested to see the response there. It's measuring those discrete things versus on the program level. It's kind of like back in the day when your instructor-led training was the only thing that you were delivering. You had course objectives, which is great, but then it's also, but what are the outcomes of the course? So yes, I'll be able to do these 3 or 4 things, but then how do I link that to an actual outcome that's going to help, impact either individual, group, or business performance?
Right. Let's have a look at the answers, please, Ivy. That pretty much reflects what you said, right, Stephen?
Yep. And then look at what's number 2 down there at the bottom, which we will actually get to. So Michael's going to come in here in a second and talk about kind of how measuring in the flow of learning can look. And I will then also be coming in behind that to talk about how do you monetize blended learning, or just measurement in general, using some of the key metrics that we like to use within Metrics That Matter. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, and this is really the fun part of really the show and tell of an example of measuring in the flow of learning. This is just one example that we've come up with, but we think you'll find it an interesting and compelling one. We're going to give an example of a leadership program for future leaders, and this is a program that's being deployed across an entire year on a quarter-by-quarter basis. And it's being provided across different learning modalities. And as we layer in the content, you can see that it's scheduled in a logical sequence to build skills and capabilities over a 4-quarter period. Next, we establish a measurement plan, and you'll notice that the plan is flexible on what and how that measurement will be accomplished. The level of feedback rigor is different based on the modality and the length of the training interventions that are being provided. So in addition to the method by which the learners are prompted for feedback, it varies based on the different modalities, the different functions, to really encourage their feedback to prevent some level of fatigue, of survey fatigue. In this case, the program check-ins are being done by virtue of email, the online facilitated learning by virtue of providing a QR code that the learners can click on and submit their feedback via their mobile devices. And for the self-paced learning content, the content has embedded links within the e-learning so that the learner can take a short survey in the body of the self-paced learning that they're doing. Next, we start taking a look at what that data can look like. And in this example, we're going to show you a dashboard that was created using Metrics That Matter. This is a customized dashboard for this particular blended learning program, which is one of the capabilities that we allow for in the MTM platform. Now, the first thing that we can take a look at is the top key metrics across the program. And when you look at that, the overall effectiveness scores are quite good. You're seeing that the top box effectiveness scores are 80%. The second column shows the scrap learning, which Roberta previously defined as the learning that is consumed but not applied back to the job. And it shows that scrap learning is 27%, which means that 73% of the learning is actually being provided, being applied, and that's a pretty good score in general. The net promoter is close to 50%, and the estimated performance improvement as reported by the learners is at 26%. If all you saw were these numbers about this program, your reaction might be, this program is going great. Don't break what isn't broken. And that maybe wouldn't be a bad response because these numbers are quite good. But you do have an opportunity to start looking further into the data. And when you start drilling into the data further within the dashboard, you see that there are indeed opportunities for improvement. Starting with the key performance areas. 3 of those areas, the value, the effectiveness, and the business results, are underperforming. How do we know they're underperforming? Because we're measuring them against a benchmark, and you can see that they're all performing below the benchmark. And then when you drill further in across those 3 additional categories of scrap learning, net promoter, and performance improvement, you can see that the self-paced, web-based e-learning training is actually pulling your scores down. In all 3 of those areas, we are underperforming against the benchmark. In addition, you can see that there's a downward trend in the self-paced learning as well in this widget that defines each modality. Finally, we can filter the comments that are coming in from recommendations that the learners who have the highest level of scrap learning are providing to us. And that is being done with the Explorance AI machine learning capability called Millie, which has done an analysis of the open text comments. And it's showing us that there's a pattern of learners recommending to us that they want more practice exercises, tutorials, and workshops for the program. I know that that's a bit of an eye chart, and you may not be able to see that, but those are the overlying themes that are being reflected in the open text comments. All of that before we've actually read a single comment. The next step would be we would drill in to those specific repetitive recurring recommendation themes. We'd read more and we would have enough to understand what action we might take. And in this case, what we're going to do is take action and make a pivot. We're going to call an audible on the line of scrimmage, if you will, with a football analogy, and decide to change up the self-paced learning to hands-on labs, which essentially is what learners are basically asking for in the recommendation. So for the last 2 quarters of the program, instead of doing self-paced e-learning, we're going to transition those modules into hands-on labs. And when we look across the data that we get at the end of Q4, we're seeing that indeed the change seems to have made a difference. There's been improvement across all areas. And specifically, we can see that in the key performance area, there are improvements across the board at 6%. The cumulative underperforming top box scores of those 3 areas of learning effectiveness, value, and results are being pulled up. You can see that in the trend line that's being reported on. Everything is on the upswing, as well as the effectiveness of those hands-on labs, which is the highest performing modality that is being offered within this program. And overall, what you're finding is that the scores across all of these areas are up 6% in terms of the key performance areas, but 4% less waste, an over 2% increase in net promoter, and a 5% increase in performance improvement. Now, the big headline here is that by effectively analyzing the data throughout this program and making real-time changes on a prescriptive basis, the cohorts participating in this year's program were able to share in the benefits that future participants will have going forward. So had we merely left the program alone based on the Q2 results, which looked actually pretty good, we would have sacrificed the opportunity to cut down on waste. We would have given up a pretty significant performance improvement gain, and that represented a lost opportunity that ends up being quite costly. I'm going to ask Steve and Roberta to delve a little bit deeper into this topic. First, Roberta, please share some of your research.
Before that, Michael, we had a question that I thought I would address, because a couple of people have chatted about it. One of them was just where this data was coming from. We probably didn't describe that very well. So this data is being driven by surveys that are being sent out to the learners via our tool Metrics That Matter, either through, like Michael was sharing on a previous slide, it's either coming in through an email or it's a QR link that's being provided live during training. So something like this, we could be showing you a QR code, you'd scan it and fill out the survey. And those are being done right at the moment of completion of something. We're also doing them in follow-ups. So if someone does something 90 days later, they get a follow-up. And then their manager also chimes in with a follow-up survey. Folks were talking about the challenge of getting everyone to fill out the surveys, especially the managers, and that seems to delay the process, and it's a lot of work. So one of the things that we recommend, especially for a program like this, is that your measurement strategy has to be communicated up front with everybody. Your sponsors, the designers who are designing this, the developers, people that are delivering it, the learners themselves, especially the learners' managers. In fact, Michael and I were just in Atlanta 2 weeks ago with some folks at one of our Impact Tour events, and this challenge actually came up, and one of the folks volunteered that what they're doing now is when they're developing programs like this, especially the blended learning that are kind of high cost, high exposure, they're developing manager support guides. So just like you would develop a participant guide or an instructor guide or anything else along that would help facilitate the delivery of the program, they're throwing in a manager support guide that they're providing the managers via their LMS, almost like the managers are attending the training along with their participant. Obviously, they're not, but they're getting these guides delivered to them in real time so they can see for themselves what is this training, how are they being presented this training, what are some of the key topics and goals, what are some of the key takeaways, but more importantly, here's what you, manager, can do to help support your person with the learning. So it's very prescriptive and directive to the managers. And this is a measurement activity, folks. Okay, call it manager performance support, whatever you want. But this is a way to help engage managers in the training. And by engaging the managers, the learners are even more engaged, and then they're going to be more conducive to completing these surveys because they know that this feedback is going to be used to make improvements. And they know that it's not just about checking a box to do a survey. So it's about communicating these things up front, embedding it into the process, especially when I was chatting with somebody else about when leaders, sometimes we have clients who have leaders come in and teach some of these programs. Like if you're going to talk about finance, you know what, we're going to have the CFO come in or a high ranking director come in and teach this content. And if they can be sending the message like, oh, by the way, guys, I want you to tell me how I did. And if I hit the key points that you wanted me to talk about today, that encourages them. It's like, wow, here's leadership of this company telling me to give them feedback. So it's all about communicating and messaging these things as you're designing this, but also as you're delivering it.
Yeah, and Steve, it's a great call out, and I appreciate you jumping in to talk about that. I see that one of the comments, and forgive me if I mispronounced your name, but hopefully I'll get it right. Shronda, you pointed out that your biggest challenge is to get the learners and the managers to fill the surveys out, requires a lot of time and follow-ups. And I think that really goes back to Steve's comment about the measurement plan. If you remember the slide that I showed that showed the measurement plan is well thought out so that, or it should be well thought out so that you're not necessarily measuring everything. You take a very planful approach of what you measure and how you measure it. If you remember in the measurement plan, we're not measuring the same way. For check-ins, we were sending emails. For the self-paced, it was a QR code. For the e-learning, it was embedded right into the content. So you're making it easy and as painless as possible for the learners to do the feedback so it becomes seamlessly embedded and not the same survey approach. You also make sure that you tailor your surveys for those different learning interventions. For the self-paced learning and for the check-ins, they're probably very, very short surveys. For the online facilitated, a little bit more questions. So you vary that approach. But I can't emphasize what Steve said, which is to have the support of the managers is probably one of the most important components to making sure that you're actually getting feedback.
Now,
Great.
let's skip over now back to business impact. And Roberta, tell us some things that Brandon Hall Research is finding.
Sure thing. Thank you. And keep those questions coming, folks, because if we don't get to it during, we'll certainly get to them at the tail end of this webinar. So what we're seeing at Brandon Hall Group, Michael, if you'll pull up your slide deck, we seem to have lost it. Is everyone seeing it?
I see it.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, that's just my end then. Okay, never mind. So the slide content contained, I think it was 49% face budget resource management challenges. Yeah. So nearly half of organizations struggle with budget and resource management and training. Makes perfect sense when you consider how difficult it can be to demonstrate the ROI of learning investments, especially when 27% of learning never gets applied on the job. our research highlights that organizations are desperately seeking concrete evidence of impact. The study that we recently ran found that while organization budgets are constrained, many large organizations operate with surprisingly limited resources. I think what makes the Explorance case metrics particularly valuable is that they represent tangible, measurable improvements that translate directly to impact. The 4.05 reduction in scrap learning means more of your training investment is actually being applied in the workplace. The 5.07% performance improvement figure is pretty powerful as well. They might sound like small percentages, but when you apply it across an entire workforce, they translate to significant financial impact. And that's where L&D teams need to effectively tell their story to secure their seat at the table. So let me hand it over to Steve, who will walk us through what these percentages mean in real dollars for your organization. And he'll demonstrate how you can apply these metrics using established methodologies to monetize your impact.
All right. So we're going to talk about monetizing some of the metrics that we talked about earlier and what I put in the chat. And that's scrap learning, that's wasted learning, right? We borrowed this from the manufacturing environment. Scrap learning is stuff that's not used. Think about I like to use home improvement examples because that's all I've been doing for 20 plus years since I've owned my house. But you buy 10 cans of paint. You're painting your house. You buy 10 cans of paint, and let's just say, you're going to see a metric here, almost 30% waste. That's like taking 3 cans of that paint and just walking it over and just dumping it out, right? You wouldn't want to do that, right? Well, as corporate learning, we don't want to do that either. So go ahead, Michael. We're going to show 2 of our metrics here, and we're using some numbers here. This 1283, so that's the ATD's average. So when they do their yearly research study on the state of the industry, that's the average that companies are spending per employee. So if we have 300 participants in this program, so we're using that program that Michael showed you. If we're spending 1283 on that per person, then we have this annual budget. Go ahead. So let's focus on the left-hand side first, this waste and scrap learning. So what we're doing is we're taking that scrap learning rate. So at the end of Q2, we had that scrap learning rate of 27.67. And if we're wasting that much, and if we multiply that by the average spend per learner times 300 employees, that's $106,000 of waste. Now at the end of Q4, remember, we pivoted because we were measuring things as they were happening. We pivoted into that new delivery method, and scrap went down by about 4%. So using that same calculation, we reduced waste by $15,000, which that's pretty cool. But if we hadn't been measuring that, we wouldn't have known that that's what had happened, right? So we've got that reduction in waste, which is great. Anytime we're reducing waste, no matter what we're doing in whatever industry you're in, this is a good thing. And this is a way to just say, what does reducing waste by 4%? Well, what does that really mean? Well, this is an ROI type metric that you can apply to this. Now we'll jump over to performance improvement due to learning. So what we're doing is we're collecting something we call estimated performance improvement. By the way, this is a method that has been used for decades. It's part of the Jack and Patty Phillips ROI methodology, and it's actually been adopted into the ISO standards that were released 2 years ago. So if any of you are ISO certified or you know about ISO, 2 years ago, they released a new standard around human resource management, learning and development metrics. And they use this estimated performance improvement as a ISO standard. And so what we've done is we're taking that because we collect this data in our tool metrics that matter. We're asking people to estimate and isolate how much of their performance will improve and how much of it is truly based on the training. And then we're just applying this financial number to it. So The other number we have here is $75,000. So we're taking an average of $75,000 a year, because we're not now looking at the cost of a program. We're looking at performance improvement on an individual basis. So if we know that performance improvement is about 26%, and we multiply that by average salary of $75,000, multiply that by 300, we get around 5.87 million. The idea here is that, you know, you're expecting, if you're paying somebody $75,000 a year, you're expecting $75,000 in performance. And if we're getting that 26% performance improvement, we can monetize that, right? These are these ROI calculations folks have been talking about and wanting to use. And they are the legitimate calculations using just a couple of numbers that you can talk to the business about. So we do the same thing at the end of Q4. We measured our improved performance. So not only did we eliminate waste, but that also usually also increases performance. So that gap that we did is we improved it by 1.14 million. And so, and we always see that in MTM too. So when we're measuring scrap and EPI, when scrap goes down, because we want it to go down, waste goes down, improvement usually goes up almost every single time. Now, where this gets really powerful is if you want to scale, right? So if you were, let's say we scale this out to 1,000 participants and we get the same type of data, well, now you can see the results really start to get pretty big. Okay, so this is scalable in this blended learning program, blended learning, anything that you're doing. You can use these metrics, apply a couple of dollar figures to them, and get your ROI. Excuse me. I'm losing my voice, Michael, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, let's provide some important takeaways before we jump into some additional Q&A. Hopefully what you've seen are some excellent opportunities to leverage blended learning within your overall learning strategy. What we suggest is pick the kinds of programs that lend themselves to blended learning. And those would be some of the ones that are for these kinds of initiatives, but also that lend themselves to a diversity of modalities over a period of time across cohort groups. And it's very important to incorporate the measurement and evaluation needs in the design of the program. In other words, building out a measurement plan is sort of like building out a house. You're not going to build a house without a foundation. The measurement is part of the foundation. So don't build your program and then think about how am I going to measure. Build your measurement plan as you're building out the program. And in doing so, map out a plan for how you will evaluate the data and when and how you'll use the data. And then leverage the kinds of automation tools similar to what I showed you in the renderings, reporting and dashboards, and use those tools to be able to make real-time prescriptive changes while you're in real time, as opposed to looking in your rearview mirror saying, what would I do the next time if there is a next time? Those are lost opportunities. And if you do so, you'll put yourself in a position that you can present some compelling stories. Presenting compelling stories are going to let your leaders, your learning team, protect and secure funding. We find that some of our clients are able to not only protect and secure their funding, but expand their funding even when the rest of the organization is being asked to make cuts, because they can tell their story by showing that they're using data to drive decision-making. And that is what's going to get L&D with their much-deserved seat at the table. I want to go back to one point, which is the question of how do we get people to respond. And we talked about manager involvement, but there's another component, and there was a white paper that Explorance did a few years ago where we did some research on evaluation and survey fatigue. And what we found in our research was that employees are actually not fatigued with getting surveys. What they're fatigued on is feeling that they're not being listened to, is that their feedback is actually being ignored. So it's really important to be able to show your learner population as part of your employee population that you're listening to their feedback, that you're acting on their feedback. And that comes across in a couple of different ways, that you're making changes to the program, such as what we did in the example that we showed. We pivoted midway through the program, but it also comes across in the leaders within learning and right down to the facilitators telling the learners that their feedback is being listened to. I often say to our new clients that when you're deploying learning, you need to have your instructors give a speech at the beginning, at the end of every session that they're facilitating to tell the participants that this is part of the process of paying it forward and that some of the things that they're experiencing have gotten better specifically because of what their colleagues had provided in feedback. This is the opportunity to now pay that forward. So I'd like to jump into some additional Q&A that we can potentially facilitate.
I do have one question for you, Michael or Stephen, if your throat's okay. What are some opportunities for L&D leaders to tell their stories more effectively? Was one question that came in.
Yeah, Steve, do you want to jump into that one?
I will try, see if my voice holds out. Opportunities, yeah. So it's part of that, again, it's getting that seat at the table, but it's about seeking out these relationships. So when we're working with our business stakeholders, it's not just delivering training to them, it's helping them solve a business problem and being able to have these regular communications, meetings, workshops. We have one client, they have these things, they call them data parties, where they're bringing together various members of L&D and their business partners, and they are presenting the data that they're collecting, kind of like what we just did to you. And making it, again, it's part of becomes part of the culture, becomes part of the process, is sharing these stories. And it's not about, folks, it's not about putting a bunch of graphs and charts and pictures on 25 slides and going ta-da. It's literally, it's telling a story. You've got to be able to, I always say you have to answer a couple of questions. It's what, so what, and now what? So it's like, we delivered this stuff. Here's what we found out, but now here's the important information. Here's what we want to do about it. Here's what this means. Here's how this is connected to corporate goals and priorities. So it's not just getting the metrics and the data right, although that's important, but it's the story that you tell that goes with it.
Yeah, another example, Roberta, that I can relate to is a client that we have worked with that was in a manufacturing environment, and they literally put up on a bulletin board a chart that they regularly changed out on a monthly basis that said, this is what you said, this is what we did. This is what you said, this is what we did. And it showed the participants that they were being listened to. And the result of that is that the level of response rate went up and it actually stayed up. Very simple practice of you're giving us feedback, we're listening, we're taking action. The other thing that I'll point out is the process of telling stories is not just telling it within the L&D group, but learning how to tell that story to the people who you report up to, and even the people who you don't report up to within HR. I often say, if you found yourself serendipitously in the elevator with your CEO and your CEO said, hey, you're in charge of learning, how's it going? What are you going to say? What's the story that you're going to tell on an elevator ride to help your CEO know that you're making decisions from data and those decisions are making an impact?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat or in the Q&A panel about if we're not collecting these types of metrics, or there's so much survey fatigue going on that people aren't answering the surveys, how can we still demonstrate ROI? I'll give you two perspectives. The quick one is to actually have some data around, well, what's the monetization value of the problem, right? How much is this problem costing? How much are we investing in the problem to fix it? And then we can divide by the cost of the problem and multiply by 100, right? Just a simple ROI, cost of the program. What are the benefits? You divide by the cost of the program, multiply by 100. That's ROI. That ROI calculation it's deceptively simple because there's a lot that goes into how much does this problem cost us and how much are we spending on it. The other thing though is having conversations with your stakeholders. The first time someone asks me about ROI, I ask them to define what ROI means to them. And a lot of times, it's not ROI as a return on investment. It's ROI return on impact, or it's more about return on expectations. Well, I would expect that if we did this, we'd get these types of things happening. Okay, that's great. Now, what type of evidence could we show you that would demonstrate these things are happening? And you have a conversation. Because sometimes the expectations are pretty light. And when they get heavier, when they start talking about metrics and data and numbers, then it's okay to ask them for help and say, those are great. Where do I get those? How do we present those in a way that's going to convince you that training helped move that number? Or you can have a conversation about, well, how much do you think training will move that number? Like if a company has a goal of increasing their market share by 15%, certainly training's not on the hook for all 15%. Because there's certain things that training that can help fix, some things that it can't. So it's about whittling down that expectation. The expectation is this, okay, but what's training's contribution? And then what evidence can we bring to the table that will demonstrate that we're moving towards that contribution as learning and development? And that's how you have these conversations around ROI. It's not as scary as what people always think. It's sometimes it's just opening up and being able to help them solve their business problem. But it's also, believe it or not, sometimes they need help defining the business problem in the first place. And that's where L&D can really be stepping up and become more of that trusted business advisor than just checking the box and saying, oh, okay, you need this program to do this, ROI, and then check the box.
Yeah, and I want to make two other quick points. They're somewhat unrelated, but one point is there seems to be an obsession with L&D that if they're going to get survey data, they need to have 100% of the participants responding in order to feel like they have enough data. And you need to have just statistically significant survey response. And if you work with metrics, we'll help you understand what significant response level looks like to be able to make those kinds of extrapolations that we've been showing. You don't need 100% response rate in order to do that. The other point I want to make, separate point about the way that you can have these discussions. Certainly, we want you to have the courage to be able to have these ROI discussions. Other parts of your organization are doing it. L&D typically has not had the confidence to do these kinds of extrapolations that Steve walked through. But if you're not doing it, you're then putting yourself outside of what other parts of your organization are doing with proxy data. Separate from doing that, a very simple thing that you should be able to do is to be able to have a discussion of, here are some actions and improvements and decisions that we've made, not because we're guessing, but because we had data. To be able to reflect that you're making data-driven decisions and to reflect that kind of activity to folks outside of L&D, that's the kind of thing that if I were in the elevator with someone from the C-suite, to be able to say, here are some data-driven actions and decisions that we're taking, that immediately creates a level of respect for what you're doing. Roberta, any other questions that you're gleaning and seeing that you want us to respond on?
I think we've gotten to most, if not all of them. Stephen, would you agree? Yeah, I think anything. Yeah. We have some requests for blended learning information. We can certainly send some over from Brandon Hall Group. I don't know if Michael, Stephen, you have anything to send over. We have a ton of stuff like that in our member institute. Anything else your side, Stephen, Michael, before we?
No, I just popped in.
Okay,
I just popped
great.
something one last thing into the chat about. I know people sometimes worry or get pushed back on self-reported data, so I just put in this quote from again the ISO standards that were released 2 years ago around the fact that I'll be flippant. Sometimes we just have to get over it. It's good enough. ROI studies are long and expensive and take a lot of care, but having participants estimate and isolate it, it's scalable, it's directional, it's credible, and it's good enough for being directional around something like ROI. So don't shy away from it.
All right, why don't we get to the raffle and a couple of parting words, Roberta?
Thank you. Let's move to the next slide, please.
Should we have some parting words before the raffle? Two quick commercials from Explorance, if you don't mind. If you reside in any of the cities listed, Denver, San Jose, or Northern New Jersey, Metro New York City, and would like to participate in a dinner event where we delve deeper into this discussion in a live dinner networking-oriented environment, click on this QR code and you can look at our Impact Tour dinner events. They're complimentary. They're very fun. We just did one in Atlanta. It was an excellent meeting. And we'd love to have you at one of those events. And then if you would like to immerse yourself into a multi-day networking, thought leadership, best practice sharing event, consider registering for Explorance's annual global event. It's called Explorance World. It takes place in the beautiful city of Montreal in June. June is one of the best times of the year to visit Montreal, and we promise that you will have a splendid time. So we hope that you'll click on that QR code and explore those opportunities.
Sounds great. And over to Ivy.
Thank you, everyone. Congratulations to our raffle winner winning a free Excellence in Action program submission is John Hurtado. Congratulations, John. We will be reaching out shortly with more information.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been an insightful talk. We had a great audience, lots of questions in chat. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Michael, Stephen.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks
Ivy.
everybody for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.